I'm not a demography as destiny boy, but I do believe that demographics alters the realm of the possible. And to 2025, 2030, even beyond to 2040, we can see already today that demographic trends are altering the realm of the possible in Asia in some very important ways. You may reasonably ask, how can anybody possibly have anything interesting or reliable to say about the demographic profile of Asia 20 years from now or 30 years from now? And in my defense, I'd say for one very simple reason. The overwhelming majority of people who are going to be living in Asia in 2025, 2030, and even 2040 are already alive and already living there today. And on the basis of actuarial tables and a few other things, we can get a reasonably confident profile of these countries for these years to come, barring only catastrophes of truly biblical proportion. So, what is going to be driving the demographic change of the Asian area between now and 2025 or 2030 or 2040? The absolutely most important driver is going to be changes in fertility, drops in childbearing patterns, declines in childbearing. Indeed, already in much of the region, sub-replacement fertility, levels that are so low as to lead to population decline in the absence of immigration, are already the norm. We can see that this is going to do two things to the area as a whole. It is going to lead in many areas to a decline in labor force in the absence of immigration and eventually a decline in population size. It is also inevitably going to lead to population aging. But this is going to happen differentially in different countries, and the differential impact is what is going to change the relative aspect of this population aspect for us. Let me just tell you about some of the impacts on some of the major countries in the area. We'll start with the most negative. This would probably be for Russia. Russia is in the midst of population decline and a mortality crisis. Russia's level of mortality for its working age population has increased by about 100% for men of working age and for about 50% for women of working age over the last 40 years. Russia's portent is for relative economic decline and relative population decline over the next 20 or 30 years, and there's almost no way out of this. This is a very bad story for Russia. The next worst story is probably for Japan. Japan has the prospect of healthy aging. It has the healthiest population in the world at the moment. But Japan has been subject to 50 years of sub-replacement fertility. In 1948, Japan had an annual birth total of 2.7 million births. Last year, it had 1.1 million births, a drop of over 60%. And this has set the trajectory for Japan's future. Its labor force is set to decline very substantially, and its population is set to age very dramatically. By 2030, something like 13% of Japan's population is going to be over the age of 80. Almost one-third is going to be over the age of 65. How Japan copes with this aging wave with a shrinking labor force, even with healthy aging, is going to be a great challenge. And it almost surely portends relative economic decline for that country. The situation for China is a bit more complicated, but I think the demographic challenges on China's horizon are going to force a re-examination of the narrative of China's inevitable economic rise. Without going into any detail, we see four big problems on China's horizon. The first is the peaking and then indefinite decline in working age manpower in China. This will probably begin in 5, maybe 6 years. The second is very rapid population aging for China. China's 65-plus population is slated to grow by 3.5% a year between now and 2040, on much lower income levels than Western gray countries have experienced to date. Then we have two sort of science fiction problems that are on China's horizon. One is the coming rise of the army of unmarriable young men. Some of my calculations suggest that for the country as a whole, 20+% of the young men will be unmarriable by the year 2040, with much higher proportions in rural areas. We'll leave that aside for the moment. A new sort of family structure is also emerging in urban areas of China as only children beget only children. A family structure typified by the existence of children who have no brothers or sisters, no cousins, no uncles, no aunts. Radical atrophy of the extended family line, which may have big economic implications for China. This is not to say that there are not a lot of untapped sources of growth on the Chinese horizon, simply to say that looking at the demographic realities may require a revisiting of this narrative of China's rise. More favorably positioned from the standpoint of demographic fundamentals is India. In fact, there are some of my colleagues who say that India is poised to reap what they call a demographic dividend, an economic benefit due to growing labor force in the context of a still rather youthful population and small old age burden, which is supposed to, in this theory, lead to higher savings rates, higher investment rates, and thus higher levels of rates of economic growth. And the theory is fine as far as it goes, but one place that it hasn't gone terribly deeply yet is into examination of the particulars of India's regional population change. When one looks at those particulars, one sees a great demographic Achilles heel for India, I think, and some of our sessions have discussed this already. And those are educational shortfalls, especially for women. Let's see how to be diplomatic about this. It is not even plausible to compare China's present educational profile with India's present educational profile. India is half a century behind China in the race for eliminating illiteracy. At this point in time, young people, younger workers in their 20s and 30s still face a situation where 1/4 of this group has never been to school. The lack of education and the attendant implications for health put a burden on human capital in India, which complicates India's prospective rise and will do so for at least the generation immediately ahead. So that leaves the United States. And I suppose by the process of elimination, we'd have to say that the demographic prospect for the U.S. is the most favorable of these 5 major Asian powers. The United States, as I actually mentioned already, faces a prospect of continuing moderate population growth for the foreseeable future due to America's relatively high birth rate, which is a round replacement, and its continuing relatively high migration levels. Not only continuing population growth in total, but continuing moderate growth of the labor force, and also, as I think Ashley mentioned, moderate rather than rapid population aging, unlike Russia, unlike Japan, unlike China. So as far as the demographic fundamentals go, these seem in a relative sense to favor the United States over the 4 other countries that I've just mentioned. As Ashley mentioned, and as we all know, the United States has plenty of problems, and I could spend much more than 10 minutes going through all of those problems. But I suppose I would conclude by saying that from the demographic standpoint, the talk of America's decline, at least at the moment, seems greatly exaggerated. Or to paraphrase Clemenceau on Brazil, if you prefer instead, yes, America is in decline today. America has always been in decline. America always will be in decline. And let us keep it that way. Thank you.